Hello everybody, it's a Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match of gameplay. This time around we are on the map, the Tower of Hoeth. And so of course, for those of you who don't know, the Wood Elves did get some pretty significant changes, just like the steam tank, and of course there were some high elf changes. There was a whole bunch of balance changes. The Beastmen of course had changes. So of course the Wood Elves had some pretty significant changes as well, and I think they were actually one of the more changed, if not the most changed faction that came out, or that got adjusted. And the main changes were that Glade Guard was, at least some of the Glade Guard, the Hagbane tips were made cheaper, and all of the low tier magic projectiles that the elves used to have are now no longer magical. So Starfire Shafts and Hagbane tips now cause simply normal damage, which is on one hand good because it means that against dwarves they're fully functional in the vast majority of cases now. On the other hand, it's not so good because it means you don't have a cheap and easy counter to ethereal, at least not a cheap and easy range counter to ethereal. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. In general, though, I would say it's an improvement. So regardless, what we are looking at here with this composition is we do, of course, have Orion as our lord. And Orion is just a decent combatant. He does have cause fear, terror. He's unbreakable. He does have two sort of disruptive abilities to bound spells, Hawk's Talon and Hounds of Orion. And neither's particularly powerful, but both do have 3 charges. A fairly low cooldown at 90 seconds. And they can definitely cause some damage, especially in his clumped up units. And then he does, of course, have Foe Seeker, and I, of course, did give him the Cloak of Asia just to provide him with regen and some sustainability in the front line. For my front line, or actually for my second lord here, for my hero, I did decide to bring a Branch Wraith. As usual, as I kind of said multiple times, I do think this is almost a mandatory pick. The Branch Wraith, of course, does provide that Call of the Woods for +5 melee attack and all nearby units. It does give you some staying power in the front line. It's fairly tanky, with 60 armor and physical resistance, so definitely pretty resilient. You do have the Penumbral Pendulum, which gives you some armor-piercing damage against their infantry, the Chaos Infantry, and then of course there's blood to heal your troops if needed. My front line here is composed entirely of Eternal Guard and a single unit of Eternal Guard with shields. These guys, of course, will hold the line against basically everything except Forsaken for a good amount of time. If they get into a fight with Forsaken, then they are in for a very, very bad time, and it will get smushed in with contemptuous ease. So that's definitely one of those things you got to watch out for. However, that is why you do have the Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts here in the second line, who can focus fire the unshielded Forsaken pretty effectively. In the back, rather than bringing cavalry, I did decide to bring 3 units of War Dancers with Azrai Spears. These guys are arguably the best anti-large infantry in the game, despite not being the most expensive or perhaps the best in a straight-up fight. The fact that they have 46 speed means that they can really kind of hunt down and hound enemy heavy cav and drag them down to the muck. This is especially powerful against Chaos, which of course has a pretty big selection of heavy cavalry, or not a big selection, but does have a tendency to bring heavy cav. They also do have immunity to psychology, which means they will basically almost never rout against enemy monsters, which is really, really cool. Behind them, I also did bring a unit of Way Watchers. Way Watchers did get some buffs as well. I do believe that Hawk's Precision was fixed, that it originally was bugged, and they also do have increased rate of fire, as well as 2 additional rounds of ammunition, which is really, really strong, and makes them an absolute powerhouse now, even more so than they were before. Before they were a little situational, but definitely strong now. And up in the sky, we do have a unit of Hawk Riders rather than bringing cavalry. These guys, of course, do have melee armor piercing. They can get me easy rear charges, and they can once again poke away at more lightly armored enemy troops with their arrows. On the ground, my opponent, for his part, decided to bring a bit of an interesting composition here. He only brought 1 lord, and it was a Chaos Lord on foot. So that's something you don't see very often. Usually you'll see some of the monstrous lords. You'll see something like Kolek or perhaps Sigvald if you're going for tankiness, but a very, very cheap lord here. A front line with 3 units of Aspiring Champions, which is definitely very surprising. I'm not entirely sure why that is. So they have very solid stats, and they can definitely cut their way through cheap infantry pretty effectively for the cost. They are backed by 4 units of Chaos Warriors, who can, of course, cause significant hurt to Elvish infantry, and they're very tanky against arrows. He also did bring Chaos Spawn, who can deal some pretty good damage to lightly armored troops, and despite of course being large targets, they can potentially do some damage. I do think they're a bit of a risky pick, and personally wouldn't bring them against Wood Elves because of the shooting Wood Elves can bring, but they do have some potential if played carefully. In the back, my opponent does have a unit of Forsaken, of course, to hound my rear troops, as well as a unit of Chosen with Great Weapons, which is an interesting pick, perhaps to chop some large troops and heavily armored troops, because of course the Wood Elves do have a few of those. A unit of Chaos Warriors with Halberds to shut down large, and in the back, a unit of Chaos Knights to get those rear charges to interfere with my backline, as well as 2 units of Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes, once again really to counter armor. I do think it's interesting though that my opponent decided to pick these units to counter armor rather than, for example, halberds, which I think would be a more reliable pick. Over here, Orion is helping shut down the Chaos Spawn, who my opponent kind of throws straight at the Eternal Guard, but that means they don't really get their charge bonus because the Eternal Guard was braced, and they will get dragged into the muck very, very shortly. However, it does mean my opponent does get his full charges off here with the Spying Champions, and as you can see, the Spying Champions are actually doing some pretty significant hurt to the Eternal Guard already, and that's before the Chaos Warriors make their charge, and once that happens, this front line will struggle horribly. Out on the flanks, you can see the Forsaken are pursuing my Way Watchers, and I don't have them on skirmish, and I'm not paying attention to them, so they will take some nasty hurt here. However, the War Dancers with Azrai Spears do get a full charge in on the Forsaken and are dragging them into the muck, because Forsaken have terrible melee defense, and are getting kind of slaughtered there. You can see a lovely Penumbral Pendulum goes down. Not the greatest damage, but definitely does some work against the Chaos Warriors, while over here, Orion is in the thick of things, fighting against the Chaos Lord, as well as the Chaos Warriors. Now, the problem with Orion, though, is that he is very, very squishy. He has very low armor. He does have some missile resistance, but nonetheless, he can go down very, very quickly if you don't pay attention, even with the Cloak of Isha. So, he's definitely taking a bit of a beating here, and I will be forced to kind of pull him back. You can see I do cast the Hounds of Orion over here, just trying to get some damage in on the Chaos Marauders. You can see they're doing some huge damage there. However, my front line now is buckling. You can see the Chaos Knights sneak past my 2 units of War Dancers with Azrai Spears, and get into my Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts. However, the War Dancers are on point, and they will shortly drag these into Chaos Knights down into the muck. They're really, really pretty powerful for that. Over here, though, I do have to be careful with Orion, who's getting kind of slaughtered. You can see I'm poking away at my opponent's cavalry with the Hawk Riders, who do have pretty decent missile damage and can definitely kind of get some poke in. Over here, you can see some of the Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts still firing away, still causing some damage to that front line. While on the flank, the Way Watchers, as well as the Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts, have gotten clear, have gotten beyond my opponent's shield line, and are starting to pick away at him. Unfortunately, my fresh unit of War Dancers as our Spears was wasting time chasing these Forsaken into the woods, and that meant that while they did get shattered, they simply weren't present. Now, I'm making a little bit of a risky play here with the Way Watchers. I could have definitely pulled them further back to ensure that they were constantly getting their boosted damage. I should have perhaps pulled them back a little bit further, but you can see they're definitely causing some serious hurt, and are going to be whittling down this front line pretty quickly. Over here, Glade Guard has kind of disentangled themselves. The War Dancers with Azrai Spears are in the thick of things, and while they certainly won't beat Chosen with great weapons, they can muck them up and hold them in place for a very long time. In the meantime, these Hawk Riders are causing a little bit of damage in melee, and I'll be able to pull back some troops here and there. I have also shifted Orion around, trying to induce some tear outs. Of course, with the Spying Champions morale boost, it's going to be very, very hard for me to force them to break. The Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts are picking away these unshielded troops, though, and you can see they're going to be causing some immense hurt, and all these guys are very, very susceptible to that sort of treatment. Over here, the War Dancers with Azrai Spears do catch my opponent's Marauder Horsemen, who are trying to interfere with my backline, and are going to drag them into the muck and kind of massacre them to a man. Definitely, these guys do not want to be fighting War Dancers with Azrai Spears. That is one of the most potent units for that. Over here, the War Dancers are getting into the Spying Champions, and War Dancers are not the most terrible units against enemy infantry. They don't have the highest melee attack, but they definitely do have a pretty monstrous melee defense and armor piercing, which makes them pretty potent against some of these heavily armored troops that Chaos has. Over here, Orion is getting mucked up a little bit, but I do get a lovely cast of Earthblood. That was one of the big problems in this game. I completely forgot to utilize my magic, and in the meantime, my opponent is busy trying to micro his troops over here, so he has left his Chaos Knights kind of sitting out, as well as these Marauder Horsemen sitting out. You can see the Eternal Guard here still holding strong, and at this point, my opponent's troops have really been reduced to these pockets over there. Over here, the Branch Wraith is slugging it out with the Chaos Lord and doing an okay job of it. The Branch Wraith's not the best of melee combatants, but definitely okay. And you can see just the hail of arrows now coming in against these 2 last units of Chaos troops bunkered down over here. And these guys are really, really susceptible to that sort of stuff. So we'll throw things into fast forward now. There's very little action going on, as my opponent's army does simply shatter, and we get a Pyrrhic victory. Was my build and play there optimal? Not exactly. Definitely, I forgot to use magic. I forgot to make good use of Earthblood. I should have definitely tried to interfere with my opponent's charges by using Orion and the Branch Wraith. That's one of those good things to do with heroes. Try to stop your opponent's charges with heroic units, because it'll reduce the amount of damage that connects with your main line. As you can see, the Eternal Guard basically got slaughtered to a man. However, the Way Watchers, the Glade Guard with Starfire Shots, and the War Dancers performed incredibly well. And of course, War Dancers are one of those units that is incredibly powerful against heavy cavalry, but they also do well against infantry. As discussed before, even against Chosen, they'll hold out for a really long time. And against Chaos Warriors, they can actually, I do believe, win, because their melee defense is just so monstrous. They do have that built-in armor piercing, and just have really solid melee stats in general. So they're a very, very potent unit. Definitely something not to underestimate. The Way Watcher is very, very powerful. And I think the buffs to the Way Watchers definitely shown in this game. You can definitely see how much more damage they were doing with that hawkish precision. Hawk Riders didn't get the best performance, but they definitely did laid down a little bit of hurt on the Chaos Spawn and those sorts of units. I definitely think bringing the Chaos Spawn was a risky move for my opponent, because Wood Elves, of course, do have a lot of counters to unshielded, poorly armored, in large targets. Anti-large is really, honestly, one of those kind of fortes for the Wood Elves, because they just have such a huge selection of powerful anti-large troops. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent. Sit down over here. Definitely had a lot of fun. Definitely was pretty intense after basically my entire internal guard front line got annihilated. It was definitely a lot of fun. It was definitely cool to try out the reworked Wood Elves a little bit and give them a fair shake and quick match. So I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, or questions, or anything like that, be sure to post them down below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Over and out.